Hi, and welcome to EXS 540 Research Methods. My name is David Spearer. You can call me David, both in email communications and also if we do a Google Hangout. I've been at LIU now for the past 11 years. I was actually there physically for 8 years and then ended up moving out to Arizona, as I mentioned in my email. I figured that recording my voice over the PowerPoint presentation would be a little bit easier for you to understand what I'm trying to get across on the slides. So let's get started. Research methods is the systematic process of discovery and advancement of human knowledge. There are a few words in here that I think we need to talk about. First is systematic process. Research is a system, it's a formula, and within it is a procedure, a step-by-step accounting of what is done to get from point A to point B. We'll talk a little bit more about this as I go through the presentation. Research is also about discovery and advancement of knowledge. In other words, it's an investigation into a topic or issue. It's a deep learning about some kind of concept, and research is often done to advance knowledge, to fill the gaps in scientific literature, to add to the base of knowledge that we already have on a particular topic, or to maybe become familiar with a new concept. So what is research? Well, as we mentioned before, it incorporates a system. And that system is really the scientific method, how we go about from creating a hypothesis or prediction of what we think is going to happen, to collecting data, to analyzing the data, and then to reporting our findings and either substantiating our hypothesis or contradicting it. Research answers questions. We ask questions to investigate, again, issues, topics, concepts. It's really kind of fascinating because if feasible, you could research anything. I mean, when you go on Google and look for the best restaurant on the Upper West Side or in Brooklyn, you're doing research. Even though it may not be published research, it's still an investigation. It's a question that you're looking to answer. Research is academic, and this is where I think research becomes somewhat of an intimidating undertaking. When we say research is academic, we really mean that most of the research is done in academic type settings, whether it be universities, large medical institutions. There's an academic kind of not category, but an academic feeling about research. And because it's academic and because it's formulaic, some people find it somewhat tedious and also somewhat intimidating, that it's difficult to understand. Well, we'll talk a little bit about the research that we read, what it means, and how it's not really intimidating. Because much of research, as I mentioned before, is a formula. So if we know the formula, we're not really intimidated by the process. Research provides a knowledge base. It provides the base, but it also provides an addition to literature that's out there. When we say research provides a knowledge base, it provides a foundation on which we can then look to other avenues of a particular topic or concept or issue. So if we're researching, let's say, some kind of health-related concept, or if we're researching some chronic disease, before we knew anything about a particular chronic disease, whether it be diabetes or obesity, there was a ton of research to develop the foundational base on which we then moved and did more research and advanced our thinking. So it's necessary to familiarize ourselves with a concept, an issue, a topic that gives us a base of knowledge as a really strong foundation. Research is about an investigation, as I mentioned before. It's deducing a kind of a finding, a result from data you collect, and that's an investigation. And that's what's the most exciting thing about it, because we can research anything, again, as long as it's feasible, and if it adds to the literature, we can research anything we want. So that investigation has a lot of freedom and flexibility. Research is about planning. This is where the tedium comes in. Again, as I mentioned, it's a step-by-step process. So we need to have a plan before we do any kind of research. Take baking, for instance. If you were to bake a cake and you had some ingredients but not all, and you didn't really know the measurements but they were close, and you weren't quite sure if you had the right size pan, and you weren't quite sure that you had the right temperature for the oven, your cake is going to come out horribly. But if you plan it before you do it, where you have everything laid out, you know everything about the cake that you're supposed to bake, then the cake is probably going to come out close to perfection. So when the planning of a research project is faulty, then the research project can kind of fall on its face. However, when the planning of a research project is flawless, then that's pretty good research. And that really, in other words, the findings can really be thought of as robust, as strong, and you can really believe in what the researchers found. Research provides a reasoned argument. In a research article, the last piece of the article is called the discussion section. And in that section, often the authors will concur or agree with previous research done on that topic, or they will disagree with research done on that topic, and they will argue why their findings are either better or different, or however they want to slant it. It is that point where you're actually arguing or substantiating your findings. Now remember, hypotheses, which are a prediction of what you think is going to happen, don't always turn out the way you want. Let me give you a for instance. I did a study with a psychologist in England when I was still at LIU, and the study title was, "Does Swearing Improve Performance?" And I'm talking about cursing. And it wasn't really, my interest was more on the performance end, but the psychologist had done a lot of work in language, linguistics, and also the use of curse words. And our particular aim was to find out whether or not cursing actually improves performance during a bike test. And so we had a hypothesis that cursing would improve performance in terms of power and acceleration, but we also hypothesized that cursing would change the way the nervous system behaves. It would be a cause for heart rate to rise, it would be a cause for blood pressure to rise, and that the autonomic nervous system, the nervous system controlling blood pressure and heart rate, would see a complete overhaul due to the cursing. And what we found was that was not the case, that individuals who cursed versus the individuals who did not, we didn't see really a difference in the heart rate. So it couldn't be the autonomic nervous system that was the reason for that change. However, we did see a change in power, that when you cursed, you were able to derive much more power on the bike test. So we had to reason why that was the case. We had to provide an argument that, okay, one of our hypotheses is substantiated because we saw an increase in power. The other hypothesis is not. And, we had to provide an argument as to why we thought that could be. So, research provides a reasoned argument, but it can go either way. It can go in favor of your hypothesis or as a contradiction to it. Research incorporates procedure. As I mentioned before, it's step by step. And part of the reason why is so that you, as the researcher, and with your research design, you provide enough information that you know exactly what you're doing step by step as you go through the formula. But the second reason that we incorporate a procedure is that if another researcher reads your article or reads your publication, then they may want to replicate what it is that you did. If the procedure is shoddy, they're not going to be able to do that. So it's almost a courtesy, it's a professional courtesy to have a very clean and clear procedure laid out so that other researchers can do what you did. And that's where reiteration comes in. or kind of doing it again, there is some redundancy in writing of research, but also the redundancy is that you might want to have somebody else kind of complete the same procedure or the same design to see if they get the same values or same findings. And the last is it improves critical thinking skills. Remember, research is a deep dive into an issue, a concept, or a topic. And because of that, critical thinking skills are improved. Learning about a topic kind of from A to Z, understanding what the topic is, not only that, but what kind of questions are asked about the topic or concept and how to answer those questions is truly critical thinking. So that these are the reasons that we research, and these are kind of what define research as a whole. Let's take a look at just a kind of another way that we look at research, and that's through journals. And what are journals? They're basically periodicals that include research articles on topics and issues and concepts and formulas and all of that. And they are and have been around for ages. What you're looking at here is a kind of a stacks area in a health science library with all of the volumes here. You may be able to see my mouse, you may not, but the volumes here each represent a different journal. So journals can be medical, journals can be sports oriented, journals can be physical therapy oriented, occupational therapy oriented, neurologically oriented, whatever. The journal has a particular topic, and those are the kinds of articles that they publish. So when you look at the journals here, you can see there are various volumes of the journal, and inside of these bound copies are the articles themselves. And when you cite a journal in text or in a research paper, you cite the volume of the journal, you cite the number of the journal, you cite the year that the journal was published, and you cite and you may cite the month. You also cite the title of the journal, but you cite the page number as well. And the page number is what leads you to the exact article that you're looking for. So what do journals tell us? They tell us, they tell us a ton of information. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of information in these journals, depending upon the journal you're looking at. And the information that they give us can be kind of disseminated to the public. They can be just for a research paper. They can be kind of espoused in a research symposium. They can be presented like in a PowerPoint. There's tons of information from these research articles. It also shows us that research has been around for quite a long time, and if you are someone who does research and you are submitting to publications who eventually publish this information, you'll notice that there's a lot of people online waiting to be published. So it's quite a competitive area. And that speaks to something else, which is, the necessity of research and what are we really reading. And I'll get at that, toward the end of the presentation. So how are the journals arranged? Well, really, I mean, to be honest with you, they're arranged alphabetically usually, and as you get to the journal you're looking for, they're arranged by year, by volume, by number. And inside they're arranged by month and then by page number. So that's primarily how they're arranged. They're fairly easy to find in the stacks, but at this point now, with the internet being so advanced, we're able to get PDF volumes of or PDF copies of a lot of these articles, and especially being that I was actually at Columbia to do my doctoral degree. Being there, I still have access to their health sciences library. So it's been years, and I'm still able to access online a lot of these journals, which is a tremendous convenience because it would be very difficult for me to get there. And I don't have access to any of the schools in Arizona. I don't have the access to their health sciences libraries. How often are journals published? It depends on the journal. Some are published every month, some every year, some biannually, some quarterly. It really depends on the journal. And there are different kinds of journals. There are top-tier journals, there are low-tier journals. There are obviously medical journals, and as I mentioned before, sports journals. There are community journals, there are trade journals, so it really depends on what you're looking for. But mostly in scientific literature, you're looking at journals that are what's known as peer-reviewed, which means that they are journals where when you submit your article, the editor of the journal sends the article out to two or three other individuals who are kind of in your area of expertise. And they review your article both for content, grammar, and also for validity, whether or not, this is actually true. I mean, are you just selling a bunch of schlock here, or is this really what's going on? I'll give you for instance, too. I was at a conference many years ago, and it was a conference to learn how to write for research. So it was specifically how to present and write a research paper. And I'll never forget this. They gave us an example of a woman. I think she was at University of Indiana, if I'm not mistaken, but it's been a long time. She published in the journal Blood, and Blood is a very top tier journal in hematology. So doctors who study bloodborne diseases and things of that nature. And she published this article. I don't really remember what it was about, but there were pictures of slides in there of different cells. And so one of the pages of her article had all these pictures of cells. And it was published in Blood. It was actually highly regarded. Blood is a very top tier journal. And one of the peer reviewers got skeptical because it looked like some of the pictures were sort of the same. Wasn't really sure where they were getting the pictures. They questioned the author, and after an investigation, they found out that she fraudulently published those pictures, and that those pictures were basically fraud. And not to mention, what that does to your career. She was obviously the journal article was retracted, so it was taken out of the journal, and she was blackballed. Supposedly, this is the story that I got. She was blackballed, and I would be very surprised if she did any research after that. So you have to be careful, not about what you read, and be skeptical, obviously, of what you get, but also as a researcher, be very, very cautious about what you put in, and go with what the data tells you. Don't make up stories as you go along. So who benefits from research? Several people. Academia, that's academic institutions, as well as scientists and academics. Teachers can benefit from research. They can apply some of the research into their teachings. They can utilize some of the research in more of what they're doing in their studies. So there's a tremendous benefit overall to academic institutions. Marketers. Marketers benefit in terms of being able to sell a product. So if a product is very clearly researched and extensively researched, then it has a lot of validity and it has a lot of credibility, and marketers can be ones who benefit from that. Sports developers. I don't necessarily mean people developing new sports like a cross between lacrosse and volleyball. I mean people who develop products for sports. And, those are inventions. So, again, research can lend to the credibility of the invention. It can increase the visibility of the invention. And then people who question the invention can look back to the research and say, hey, yeah, okay, I see that this actually does work in the population that I'm looking to work with. So sports developers can definitely benefit. Manufacturers, for sure, because if you invent a product, someone's got to make it. So if that is extensively researched, then manufacturers can benefit from manufacturing more of it. But the other thing is, I recently did a study looking at the new technologies of heart rate monitors, the ones that pick up heart rate from the wrist. And the manufacturer was Omron Healthcare. They're a Japanese healthcare company. The first version that they sent us was the A version. And when we tested it on some of our subjects, we tested it on about 15 subjects, we looked at the data and we were like, this doesn't look very accurate compared to an actual heart rate monitor. So they went back and they changed their algorithms. The manufacturer changed the device to come up with the B version. And the B version was actually a lot more accurate. So it was the research that we did, even if it was only in 15 people, that caused the manufacturers to change the way the algorithm kind of read the heart rate, and therefore they had a more accurate product. Coaches, for sure. Coaches can benefit from research because there are applications of that research on the field or in the training room. And one thing that I'd like to bring up is the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research has a flagship is the flagship journal of the National Strength and Conditioning Association. And it was one of the first journals where I ever had to actually write in practical applications. But many years ago, about 8 years ago, I did some research on the effect of auditory versus visual stimuli on sports performance in different genders. And I had to write up a practical application for that. How would I talk to a coach about that? They don't care necessarily about the nitty-gritty science and the statistics. That's fine. They want to know, how do I apply this to my players, to my team? And so coaches definitely can benefit from research, especially from the practical applications of it. And players definitely benefit too, because if the coach is using those practical applications from the research study that's been done, the player is the one who ends up benefiting and improving performance. Governments. Large government organizations will give grants to certain researchers to research a particular topic of interest. And there are several calls for proposals that come out all the time. They're called RFPs, requests for proposals. They can be on anything and everything, any type of topic or issue, and depending upon what the government wants to learn, that's what they will allocate grant money for. Communications and mavens. Communicators and mavens. A maven is somebody who kind of knows a lot about a particular topic and then disseminates that information to a larger public audience. So research can definitely be an important adjunct for that. And also the public. And I think that we have to state that the public is the one that really kind of gets the research at the end, right? They get the findings. It's what's written in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal. Research done on this particular topic shows this. That's when it's disseminated to the public. And then, we have to kind of read that with caution and somewhat read between the lines. And that's one of the things we'll talk about in this class. Not everything is kind of cracked up or is on its face, valid. Let's put it that way. It's not all that it's cracked up to be. For instance, many years ago, about 15 years ago, a study in the New York Times said that treadmills burn more calories than elliptical machines. And of course, marketing for treadmills went through the roof, and so did the sales. But when you looked at the study, there was such a small number of people who were tested. The design was quite faulty, so it didn't really say anything. The finding was treadmills burn more calories, but that's all people want. They want the tagline, they want the soundbite. The soundbite's great, but if you don't look past the soundbite, you're not really investigating. You're not really looking into how the research was done, and that can tell you a lot about the product, the item, the concept, the issue, the topic. Okay, let's talk about 4 stages of research, and I kind of liken this to the trans-theoretical model in psychology. The first stage is pre-contemplation in the trans-theoretical model. It's like I'm thinking about exercising. But this is the stage before data collection. It's kind of the honeymoon stage. I have such a good question, or here are my aims for the research project. And in many cases, if you're looking for grant money, you basically write a letter of intent, which is either 1 or 2 pages, and that is where you set up your question and your aims. That's it, because that's all they're going to read. And if they don't like that, then they scrap it and they go to the next one. So it's really formulating a real strong question and strong aims. The second stage is contemplation. In this case, in the trans-theoretical model, that's like, I'm really thinking about exercising now. I'm thinking about getting in shape. However, in my kind of staging of research, it's developing the study design. It's understanding how you want to design your study. Do you want it to be longitudinal over a long period of time? Do you want it to be a crossover where team A does one part and then team B does the other part and then they flip flop? Do you want it to be cross-sectional where you take two populations and just kind of look at how they behave with particular interventions? There's so many different ways, but study design is very, very important, because if the study design is not really tight, then the research project is going to, is not going to be good. You're not going to get great findings. It's not going to be strong, and it'll be questioned. So it's important to develop a real strong study design. The third one is action, and in the case of the trans-theoretical model, action means you are going to the gym and actively exercising, or you're actively exercising outside or wherever you want to be. And this is the data collection. This is the nitty-gritty. It's getting in the trenches. It's testing the subjects. It's collecting the data, because you need to make sure that you are doing this in line with your study design and also your question. So everything before has to kind of be built upon. In the data collection is when you have to really plan for contingencies, because it doesn't always work out the way you want it to. So data collection is a tough period. It may be very long, but it's absolutely necessary to get valid findings. The fourth one is the afterglow, and this is kind of where you are, I apologize for that. Sorry, I didn't want to show you stage 5 before we got to it. And I did say there were 4 stages, but there are actually 5. Afterglow is data analysis, and this is, it did it again, so forget it, I'm not going to go back. But afterglow is data analysis. This is taking your data and analyzing it, and, really like utilizing statistics and utilizing the kind of formulaic process of research to determine, what does your data actually tell you? What am I interpreting here? There's a lot of data out there, but a lot of times it's not interpreted. That means, what does it really mean? What does it tell me? What story is it telling? That's a real important part of research, because if that's done poorly and a peer is reviewing your information, they can really pick that apart. Stage 5, however, is maintenance, and this is, again, for maintenance in the trans-theoretical model, that's in individuals who's been exercising 3 to 4 times a week, and they're on their way to changing their lifestyle habits. But in my case, in stages of research, maintenance is reporting and publishing. And a lot of times what happens is we spend 6 months, 7 months researching, and then we kind of get caught up in other stuff, and oh yeah, that data, I forgot, it's sitting there, I forgot, oh my God, I have to write it up. The fact is that once you're done with your data analysis, you should actually be writing the entire time. The introduction should be kind of written before you even start your data collection. Your data collection should inform your results, and your methods should be written even before you start your data collection, because you know what your methods are. The only thing you need to write are your results and your discussion, and that really comes from the data analysis, the interpretation. So reporting and publishing, sometimes people wait a little bit too long, and then they never get to that point. And one thing you should know is that a lot of the research you read out there, especially in the scientific literature, was completed 1.5 years before it was even published, because the amount of time it takes to publish is a good 6 to 8 months, going back and forth with revisions and everything. And by the time you get your research in, by the time you submit it, it's been 4 months after you've completed it. So 6 to 8, you're talking a good possible 10 to 12 months, and in some cases it's even longer. So we really have to be conscious of the fact that sometimes the research we read is somewhat obsolete because it happened so long ago. Why do we research? Well, if we look at the comic here, my diabetic research shows that test subjects are 98% more likely to take their diabetic pills if the pills are covered in chocolate. Guaranteed that's true. But it just goes to show you that, there are reasons that we research. One is to explain mechanisms, the why. In this case, obviously in the comic we're looking at, that's not really about a mechanism. It's more a descriptive kind of thought process. I got more people to take their medication because it was covered in chocolate. But really, true research and deep research is about mechanisms. Why do things occur? Why do they happen? So take, for instance, in muscle physiology, the Krebs cycle, which occurs in the mitochondria. Kind of remember that from exercise science way back when. The Krebs cycle was obviously researched, right? It's not like they just came up with that off the top of their head. So we know what the muscle does. We watch the muscle contract. We watch it shorten and lengthen. But in order to determine how that happens, where is the energy coming from, we had to investigate it. And they discovered the Krebs cycle. So the Krebs cycle is a major determinant of energy. So that mechanistic kind of thought process is a real reason why research is, in my mind, in my estimation, very, very necessary, especially when those mechanisms are mechanisms that relate to human performance, chronic disease, and even global suffering and global issues. We also look toward research to bring about solutions. Speaking of global suffering, there was the gentleman who created the 5-hour energy drink is a billionaire. He actually made roughly a little bit over $4 billion on that idea, and he wasn't really quite sure that he was going to make that amount of money. But he decided, what do I need with $4 billion? I need to invent stuff that's going to help the world suffering. So in this case, he's invented a device that actually pulls water out of dirty oceans and results in clean water, drinkable water, where we know that there are several areas around the world where there is not drinkable water. He's created a bicycle that can generate electricity to power a house for like 24 hours. So there's a lot of information, obviously, in the research, and he's done research and invented, these products to bring about solutions. So in some cases, that's why research is a necessity and why it's so important. Research is also done to introduce new methods of doing many different things, whether it be, molecular science or exercise science, always coming up with new methods to kind of improve things is really why, another reason why research is done. And why do we introduce new methods? We already have the methods. Well, if we were going to publish an article on methods that were already done, the peer reviewers would say, well, that's not publishable because it's already out there. So we need to put a new spin on it. And in the new methods could be new populations, new age groups. It could be new implementations, new programs, new training, whatever it is. But new methods means it's new research and it adds to the scientific literature that's already out there. We also do research to foster new knowledge, as I mentioned before, building a base of knowledge, a kind of a scientific foundation on which other studies are built or other research is done. So fostering new knowledge is an extremely important reason why we do research, and we do it to investigate phenomena. And that phenomena could be related to human performance, it could be related to world issues, it could be related to nature, it could be related to anything, but we investigate phenomena to explain it. And then once we explain it, then we go and we look at the mechanisms of why that's occurring. And that kind of leads me to investigating interests, right? So an archaeologist has certain interests in possible evolutionary concepts and topics. An exercise scientist might have interests in how plyometrics affect performance during sprinting, or they may look into muscle physiology. There's so many reasons and so many reasons why we research and also interests. It's important to understand that the researchers that are doing their research are probably researching something that is of their interest. So the research you read, if it's not a requirement or part of a class, should be research that interests you. And it could be on any topic under the sun. But try to read the stuff that interests you, because I think you'll be less intimidated if you do that. So there are 4 kinds of research or types of research that we're going to be talking about. The first is exploratory research, where there's little or no prior knowledge of the topic or concept. And the reason I have CTE Mike Webster down here is CTE stands for chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Mike Webster was played football and was a center for the Pittsburgh Steelers in the 1970s. He was he was ground zero or patient zero of chronic traumatic encephalopathy. And when he was on the gurney in the coroner's office, there was a Nigerian forensic pathologist who opened up his head and looked at his brain and saw something he had never seen in his life. So it wasn't dementia, it wasn't Alzheimer's, it wasn't Parkinson's, it wasn't any kind of brain disease he ever saw. This was an exploratory research opportunity, and he basically founded CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy. So we do this exploratory research to gain information or to become familiar with a concept. The next stage of that is descriptive, meaning this is research that basically tells us how many or how much rather than why. It's not as mechanistic as much as it is about how many. So in this case, the example is how many women in the athletic training, health and exercise science division are anemic, have low hemoglobin levels. We don't know, but let's say we found that there were 100 and 30 of them had very low hemoglobin levels and 30 had very moderate hemoglobin levels, and then 40 had normal. So now we have an idea of how we stratify that research topic, and from there, now we have to question why. It's explanatory research which tells us what's the mechanism that's causing these low hemoglobin levels in the women who are in this division. And why is this happening? And an example here, along with the anemic example, is sitting and coronary artery disease. So how is it that sitting leads to coronary artery disease? Well, we know that even in individuals who exercise for 1 hour a day, if they sit for the rest of the day, they almost negate all of the positives that they did in the gym or wherever they were exercising. So it's important to understand that we need to explore through a theoretical framework a concept. And that explanatory kind of research tells us the why. And lastly is predictive research. So again, if we understand the why and we really understand it deeply, maybe we can even make a prediction about it. In this case, I have levels of obesity of children between the ages of 9 and 15 and the consumption of soda in 2020, so 4 years from now. So can we predict that there will be an increase in obesity in that age group if there was a greater consumption of soda? Well, if you look at some of the data, you can look at the consumption of soda increased in the 1980s compared to milk. Milk went down and soda went up. And even diet soda went up because of the limited amount of fat in it. But then, of course, you have the caffeine-free versions, and so many different kinds of soda. Then you have Gatorade, which has a tremendous amount of sugar. So looking at that data, you could possibly predict that there would be an increase in obesity and overweight in that age group if there was greater soda consumption. So again, using research as a predictive format is another reason, or is another type of research that we do. And so I just want to finish by saying that research does not have to be intimidating. Remember that, it is what you make of it, both on the side of the researcher and also on the side of the observer or the reader. And let's kind of break that down for a minute. If a researcher does poorly in his study design or her study design, you're going to end up with poor findings. You're going to end up with findings that are not strong and really not valid. So it is what you make of it in that sense. And in terms of the reader, don't read it as it's so tedious. Look, I'm not asking you to go out there and read a 30-page research article, but go out there and maybe read a 5 to 6-page research article and read the abstract and read the introduction and learn a little bit about the concept or the topic, obviously, of something of your interest. Learn about it and then kind of question what it is that you're reading. Does this seem right to you? Does it seem like there's enough people here in this subject pool? Does it seem like the subjects are kind of the same, or maybe they're too different? Is there too much variety? Question it. Start to read between the lines, because a lot of the research that you're going to be reading are hopefully going to make you ask questions. And that's really the the process of learning research methods is not only learning the step-by-step procedure, because that's important, but it's also how to read it and how to write it. And that will teach you a lot more about what research is all about. So I look forward to talking to you guys again. Let's table this for now, and I will be speaking to you soon.